World-famous bedtime stories from Mom. Today's story is Cinderella. In a quiet village lived a kind-hearted girl named Cinderella. Cinderella had lost her biological parents early and came to live with her stepmother and two stepsisters who were cruel to her. Cinderella, bring this. Cinderella, clean that. From dawn till late at night, Cinderella had to take care of all the household chores. However, Cinderella never complained once. "I understood, sister. Don't worry, stepmother. Leave it to me." She always managed everything with a bright smile. Despite the hardships she faced, Cinderella's heart remained warm and pure. One day, as the stepmother gave Cinderella more tasks, she said, "Cinderella, you need to be busy again today. You have to prepare dinner and clean every corner of the house." Cinderella, as always, responded with a smile, "Yes, stepmother. I'll take care of everything." It was a bright and sunny morning. As Cinderella and her family were finishing their breakfast, suddenly the sound of a ding-dong came from the front door. Who could it be? Cinderella opened the door. There stood a royal messenger in splendid clothes. "Everyone here is invited to the royal ball. The prince is holding a grand ball to find a bride," said the messenger in a formal tone. Cinderella's stepsisters screamed with joy. "Wow, really? A ball at the palace, how splendid! We'll have a chance to meet the prince." They were already excited, imagining what to wear and how to dress up. The stepmother smiled contentedly. "This is a wonderful opportunity. Our daughters will have the chance to catch the prince's eye. We must prepare thoroughly." Cinderella was also very happy inside. A ball at the palace, I really want to go. But she wasn't sure if she could attend. Her days were filled with chores. "Cinderella, you might want to go to the ball, but you won't have time. There's a mountain of housework," said the stepmother. Cinderella was sad but didn't say anything. On the evening of receiving the ball invitation, Cinderella quietly sat in a corner of her room, lost in thought. How wonderful it would be to attend the ball. To see the splendor of the palace. But she was well aware of her situation. Her clothes were old and dirty, and she couldn't even dream of a splendid dress suitable for the ball. As if sensing her troubles, her stepsisters entered Cinderella's room. "What deep thoughts are you in, Cinderella?" one sister asked. Cinderella replied cautiously, I also want to go to the ball." Upon hearing this, the stepsisters burst into laughter. "You at the ball? How can you go to the palace in those dirty clothes?" the other sister mocked. "Just stay home and clean. That's your job." Cinderella was heartbroken. Yet she still did not give up hope. "Someday I will be able to do what I truly want." Until then, Cinderella continued with her duties patiently. The day of the ball arrived. Cinderella's stepmother and stepsisters, dressed in their most splendid clothes, excitedly headed to the palace. Cinderella bid them farewell from the window, her heart filled with deep sadness. Once the door closed, the house became silent. Unable to hold back any longer, Cinderella began to cry in a corner of the living room. "I wanted to go to the ball too." Her sobs filled the quiet house. Suddenly, a mysterious light filled the living room. Cinderella, startled, looked up to see a beautiful fairy in a splendid dress standing before her. "Don't cry, Cinderella," the fairy said in a warm voice. "I've come to help you." Cinderella looked at the fairy with eyes full of surprise and hope. Really? You will help me? The fairy nodded with a smile. Of course, but we must hurry. We need to prepare to take you to the ball. The fairy approached Cinderella and whispered, Cinderella, we need a few things to go to the ball. First, could you bring me a big pumpkin from the garden and a few mice? Cinderella, upon hearing the fairy's request, ran to the garden immediately. She returned with the biggest and most beautiful pumpkin and a few mice. Here you are, fairy godmother. Is this enough? The fairy smiled and nodded. Very good, Cinderella. Now let's start the magic. The fairy took out her magic wand and lightly tapped the pumpkin. Transform into a carriage. In an instant, the pumpkin turned into a splendid carriage. Cinderella's eyes widened in amazement. Next, the fairy approached the mice and tapped them with her wand. Transform into horses. At that moment, the mice turned into magnificent horses. Cinderella was speechless at the sight. Oh wow, that's amazing. The fairy smiled at Cinderella and said, now we have a carriage and horses for the ball. But this magic won't last forever. You must return before midnight. After preparing the carriage and horses, the fairy turned towards Cinderella. Now it's your turn, Cinderella. As Cinderella watched with wide eyes, the fairy lifted her magic wand and lightly tapped Cinderella's old dress. Instantly, a radiant light enveloped Cinderella, and her dress transformed into a dazzling gown. The dress sparkled like stars in the night sky, highlighting Cinderella's beauty. It's so beautiful. It's like a dream, exclaimed Cinderella. But the fairy wasn't done yet. I have something else for you. The fairy showed Cinderella a pair of sparkling glass slippers. They were as clear and shining as cut crystal. Cinderella tried on the glass slippers, and they fit perfectly. These slippers will make you the brightest at the ball. But remember, all this magic will disappear at midnight, the fairy cautioned Cinderella. Cinderella, transformed beautifully, stood in front of the magical carriage. Cinderella, I hope you have a wonderful time at the ball. But never forget, all this magic will vanish at midnight, the fairy reminded Cinderella again. Cinderella looked at the fairy with a puzzled expression. The fairy continued seriously, at midnight all the magic will be undone. The dress you're wearing, this carriage, even these magnificent horses will all return to their original forms. So you must keep track of the time. Cinderella listened carefully to the fairy and nodded. Don't worry, fairy godmother. I will return on time, before midnight. Her voice was firm and she was ready to keep her promise. The fairy smiled upon hearing Cinderella's response. Good, I believe you will keep your promise. Have a great time and create beautiful memories with the prince. With those final words, the fairy helped Cinderella into the carriage. And she headed to the palace. When the magical carriage arrived at the palace, Cinderella was filled with anticipation. Stepping out of the carriage, she caught everyone's attention. Who is that beautiful lady? Whispers spread throughout. Cinderella's dress and glass slippers made her the center of attention. Even her stepmother and stepsisters didn't recognize her. The prince approached Cinderella and asked her to dance. A dance with me? She nodded. Cinderella and the prince began to dance to the music. The ballroom was filled with light and music, and the two caught everyone's eye. They looked so good together. Cinderella would never forget that moment. She lost track of time in her happiness, momentarily forgetting her everyday troubles. As the night reached its climax, Cinderella and the prince were still dancing together. The music flowed beautifully and laughter filled the air around them. Cinderella was engrossed in this magical moment. But then from deep within the ballroom, the sound of a ding-ding-ding echoed. Cinderella's heart froze. Oh no, it's already midnight. She hurriedly let go of the prince's hand and started to escape the ballroom. Oh wait! Where are you going? The prince followed her in surprise. Cinderella didn't answer, rushing down the long staircase of the ballroom. Fear filled her heart and all she could think of was getting home before the magic wore off. In her haste, one of her glass slippers came off. Cinderella couldn't stop. She left the glass slipper behind and kept running. The night air was cold and her heart raced. The bell tolled midnight, marking the end of the magical time. Cinderella's heart raced, knowing the magic was fading. As she passed through the great doors of the palace, the magic began to unravel. Her splendid dress instantly turned back into her old, plain clothes. Cinderella felt despair as she felt her appearance changing. However, one of the glass slippers remained on her foot. Though she lost one on the stairs, the remaining slipper remained unchanged by the magic's end. Cinderella ran home, her heart a mix of confusion and fear, yet knowing this single glass slipper was the sole proof of her magical night. Clutching the glass slipper, she dashed through the darkness towards home. The next morning, the entire kingdom was abuzz with big news. The prince is looking for the lady he met at the ball. If she is the owner of the glass slipper, she will marry the prince. The villagers showed great interest in this news. The prince couldn't forget the beautiful lady he met at the ball. The single glass slipper she wore was the only clue. The prince decided, I must find the owner of this glass slipper. She will be my true bride. A massive search operation began at the palace. The prince's servants traveled across the kingdom with the glass slipper, searching for its owner. Is there anyone here who can fit this glass slipper? The prince is looking for you. In every village and city, the servants traveled with the glass slipper. Women lined up to try on the slipper, but it fit no one perfectly. As the prince's servants searched the kingdom for the owner of the glass slipper, they finally arrived at Cinderella's house. All the ladies in this house, please try on this slipper, the servant politely requested. Cinderella's stepsisters were thrilled, arguing over who would try on the slipper first. The first sister tried to fit her foot into the slipper, but it was too big and she couldn't get it to fit despite her efforts. The second sister then attempted, trying to shove her foot into the slipper, but it was too small for her as well. Despite the stepsisters' claims that the slipper fit them, it belonged to no one. Cinderella watched everything from a corner. She recognized the glass slipper from the ball, but she couldn't speak up in front of her stepmother and stepsisters. After the stepsisters tried and failed to wear the glass slipper, the house fell silent for a moment. Then the stepmother, with a suspicious look, turned to Cinderella, who was quietly standing in the corner. "Do you want to try it on?" she asked coldly. Cinderella hesitated but slowly stepped forward. The servant placed the glass slipper before her. As Cinderella gently slipped her foot into the slipper, it fit perfectly as if by magic. The moment Cinderella's foot slid into the slipper, everyone held their breath. "This is truly astonishing," the servant exclaimed. "Miss, you are the lady who danced with the prince that night. The prince has been waiting for you. Will you come to the palace with me?" Cinderella's eyes widened in disbelief. This was the moment her dream came true. Yet she remained humble and cautious. Really? The prince is waiting for me? The servant took Cinderella's hand and led her to the carriage. Cinderella boarded the carriage heading to the palace, embarking on a new beginning. When Cinderella returned to the palace, the prince was waiting in the grand hall. Seeing Cinderella descend from the carriage, the prince's eyes sparkled. "I've finally found you. I haven't been able to forget you since the night we danced at the ball." Cinderella, a bit nervous in front of the prince, was reassured by his warm smile. The prince carefully took Cinderella's hand, drawing her closer. "The short time we spent together was incredibly precious to me. You are my true love." The prince took a deep breath, looked into Cinderella's eyes, and said, "I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Tears welled up in Cinderella's eyes at the prince's sincere proposal. Cinderella smiled gently and nodded. "Yes, Your Highness. I would love that." The two embraced, and at that moment the palace was filled with joy. The couple married and lived happily ever after. Thank you for listening to the end. Click on the playlist for more stories. Your subscription, likes, and notifications greatly support me.